The Great Resignation, what does it mean for us? What does it mean for the world, our careers, everything as we think about what's happening now and the chaos that is unfolding around us, right? So, oh, yay, friendly faces here. I love this. Hi, Trisha. You just popped onto my screen here. Great to see you. So let's flash back a little bit. It was April of 2013. And I was serving as Vice President of Human Resources for Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. And I was sitting at my desk in Midtown Manhattan, 48th and 6th, and looking out over the growing traffic. It was a rainy afternoon, and sort of watching people walk by in their umbrellas and the water dripping down the window. And I'm sitting there and thinking, because on paper, my career at that time on paper was perfect. High-flying executive career, great salary, all of the things and the accolades that we are taught are the things to have, right? Nothing wrong with it. And though, as I'm sitting there looking out over 6th Avenue, I'm going, but is this all there is? Could there be something else? Could there be something more? And I began to dig into things, and I knew that this was not something that was particular to me because of the thousands of people that I have interviewed all over the world throughout my career, running global recruiting for Anheuser-Busch InBev, and then of course for Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. From the C-suite all the way down to the interns, I've had countless conversations that end more or less like, Trisha, you're amazing, you can do this job that I have to offer you, but what are you doing talking to me about this when you're so clearly passionate about something else? And it was with that in mind that I chose to leave the corporate world and embark initially on a journey to help solve for this challenge that most of the planet is disengaged in the work that they're doing. And this is what brings us around to this conversation of the Great Resignation, because if you've been paying attention to any of the data over the last couple of decades, this should be the great surprise of nobody that the Great Resignation is happening. I'm going to just bump my slides up here, share them with you. So, oh, can you see? Yes, there we go. Perfect. So the Great Resignation, what's here? What's happening? Well, most recently, Bureau of Labor Statistics tells us that in August, 4.3 million Americans, 2.9% of the workforce decide that they are going to peace out of their current job situation voluntarily. They're just going to walk out the door. These numbers are enormous. And according to this research that just came out in a survey that Fortune and Deloitte did with 170 something CEOs, they're saying the Great Resignation is no joke, right? 73% of them are saying that labor and skills shortages are the biggest external issue. 67% are saying that their companies are going to grow. And so there's a big gap between what people are needing and what's actually happening. It is no joke, but there is not a solution yet to the problem. And as I mentioned, this is a challenge that, if you've been paying attention, is really to the great surprise of nobody. Currently, and this is the most recent annual Gallup report, they do this every year, 20% of employees are engaged at work, which means the inverse of that, the other two categories are that 80% of the planet is disengaged or actively disengaged at work, meaning you are actively doing things to make work even less pleasant than it actually is, right? It is insane. If you look at this since 2009, where the number was 18%, right? Or 82% or 88%, we are shifting over this moment in time. But these numbers are miserable. If you're the CEO of a company and you only hit 20% of the targets that you have every quarter, Wall Street's going to give you the boot. If you're going to school and you only get 20% on a test or in a particular class, you fail the class. So why is it that as a planet, we continuously accept, I don't even want to say championing mediocrity, because it's like even worse than that. This isn't even an average grade. So it's no surprise that after, for remote workers, months of sitting on the couch and wondering and having time to think about, like, is this job actually meaningful for me, that people want to leave. And it is no great surprise as we look at healthcare challenges and wage challenges and all of these things that are popping in, that people want to leave and are rethinking what careers mean, what jobs and what work is in the broader context of society. So really, it's no great surprise that we're here. And I want to also now shift over into providing some of the macro context. So the Great Resignation is happening, but it's happening within a much broader series of events that are occurring here. And because if we can understand these broader things, we can understand the Great Resignation a little bit better and examine the opportunities that are available to us inside of this. All right, so the pandemic, we look at the disruption, this left-hand picture. The pandemic hit us like a lightning bolt, right? Economic shock, healthcare shock, economy slows down, all of these things begin to happen. But what it did is it accelerated a whole series of other changes that was already on the horizon as relates to the future of work. So this tsunami of change is still here. It's coming even faster. And so again, this is not all doom and gloom. As we're looking at this, people are choosing to leave their employers. What this simply is, the disruption, the shift, the change that are happening, there's more opportunity inside of this than we have ever had in the history of humanity. The difference is that it doesn't have the same necessarily characteristics that opportunities of the past did. So if we can learn to spot what's here, we can empower ourselves, our organizations, and society as a whole to make great decisions and to empower those who are here. So how might we empower success in the face of great uncertainty and disruption? I have been in this space of working as a futurist for the last 5-6 years of time. And this is the central core of my work. But as I shared at the very beginning, I didn't leave the corporate world initially to do that. I had begun working on these challenges related to how might we find happiness through the work that we're doing. But it was in August of 2016, so fast forward a couple of years in that narrative, I was sitting in a freezing cold conference room in Las Vegas, Nevada, and Peter Diamandis, one of the world's greatest futurists, jumps up on stage. He's, if you're not familiar with him, he's done X Prize, Singularity University, written several best-selling books, and he starts talking about self-driving trucks. And on the one hand, he's talking about how this is going to change. This technology is going to change logistics and distribution, and a whole series of things that have come to mean business as we understand it. And I am excited because this means opportunity and growth and abundance. But then it hit me, what are we going to do with all the people? Because I was born and raised in Detroit, and although there are many reasons for the economic ascensions and declines that the city has experienced over the last several decades, one of the ingredients is certainly that we did not think preemptively about the impact of technology and work in our working world. And so I started to dig into the data, the economic data around what happens in industrial revolutions, the technology data, like what are these new technologies that are here and coming? What is the impact that they're going to have? And after a few months of researching, I decided that I was going to use my life as an experiment to go and search for answers to this question. So in January of 2017, I put everything that I own into storage except for what fits into a carry-on suitcase, that bag that you see right behind me there, to go and search for answers to that question, traveling around, learning about the technologies that are creating the impact, learning from those who are masters at managing change, all to find what it is that we can use to empower ourselves. So what were those dynamics, those disruptions that I saw that kicked off this trip? First was the impact of technology and work in our working world. Second was a massive shift in workforce population. And third were potential economic disruptions that we were seeing on the horizon. So what is the technological disruption that we're experiencing right now? Well, back in 2013, the sort of the quintessential or cornerstone piece of research comes out of Oxford University. 47% of jobs in the US are going to be computerized or taken over by robots. Now, this isn't all doom and gloom because subsequently, organizations like McKinsey are saying that 2.6 jobs will be created for every job lost, but the jobs lost are different than the jobs that are gained. And according to a study that just came out with from Dell and the Institute for the Future, 85% of the jobs that are going to exist in 2030 have not been invented yet, right? So there's massive shifts happening, and we are also on the precipice of the fourth industrial revolution, right? The first was mechanical, then electrical, then digital, and now we are in the age of convergence, where the digital and physical worlds are melding, the technological and biological worlds are melding, where the virtual and actual worlds are melding, right? And ubiquitous internet and connectivity is coming online. So what is this going to mean for work? What is this going to mean for the job opportunities that we have? What could this mean for better quality of life as we're moving forward? This is the second piece of disruption that I was seeing were the shift in the world's workforce population. And we've been seeing the gig economy growing, and here in the US, 23%, 34%, growing numbers of the population are working in the gig economy in some facet or fashion. Over in Europe, since 2010, more than half of the new jobs that have been created are contract work. So this is not solely even gig workers. It's not solely sort of the administrative, traditional temporary work that we thought about, but it's medical doctors, it's senior executives. So what happens in the world when the thing that we have thought of as a job, contract, exclusive employer, no longer exists in that same structure? How do we plan for our lives? How do we mitigate risks? How do we ensure the long-term planning that we're doing is going to meet and match the needs that we have? And then additionally, since the hit of the pandemic, I mentioned it has accelerated a whole series of trends that were on the horizon, including robotization, especially in the services industry. A friend of mine is the CEO of a company called Robotize, based out of Germany, that manufactures service robots to put them into hotels that now do cleaning, room service delivery. And so for the 1.5 million jobs in the service industry that these companies at hotels are having challenges filling, the robots are going to begin filling them at an accelerated pace. And when people are ready to come back to work, those same jobs aren't going to be available. So this is an opportunity for us to begin to strengthen what we're doing in terms of upskilling, reskilling, and other spaces. And other initiatives in the market and in the economy. So that's the second big piece of disruption that I was seeing. And then the third component is economic crisis, right? Just today, the Wall Street Journal, greater inflation than we've seen in the last 30 years. We're looking at the global supply chain, backed up in ports in Los Angeles, right? So there's each of these things on their own would create challenges in the space that we call work. But when you begin to look at the convergence of each of these, we're looking at lots of disruption. Now, again, this is not all doom and gloom, and I've used my life as the experiment for this for the last several years, and push myself to this edge of uncertainty so that we don't have to collectively, right? We can come up with solutions for this. There's more opportunity inside of here than there has ever been. It simply looks different. If we can shift our definitions of what work means, we can shift notions of this idea of work-life balance into work-life integration, when we can shift from a world where we're solely working for paychecks and over into a world where we're working for purpose, the dynamic of the entire game shifts drastically. So those three factors were what got me into this business of the future of work, and those dynamics continue to unfold. So where are we now in this transition and transformation? Pandemic hit, it's not over, right? Like we are still sort of here in the midst of it. We're not at an end yet. So we are in this place in space and time where things are changing, things are transforming, and this moment of now, everything that we're seeing and experiencing is at once a manifestation of everything that has come forth up until this point. And the moment in which we are making, designing, crafting, architecting, and building what the future is going to be. So the power of creating the future of work, the future of society, the future of everything that we have isn't in some far off moment with a committee of people who's deciding what it's going to look like. It is in the hands of each and every one of us right now. So the question is, what do we want to build? What do we want our careers to look like? What is the role of work in society going to be? What does this mean for each and every one of us?
All right.
And I'm going to dive in here really quickly into three of the big paradigm shifts that are happening. And then I'm going to open up for some Q&A in the chats here. So mentioned these, so those three big areas, we'll call them technology, the shifting workforce population, and the economy, were the factors that had me interested in what the future of work is and what it's going to mean. And through that, so I was living out of a suitcase for just over a year. That was the length of that experiment. And one of the things that I learned or sort of uncovered were these paradigm shifts, because I figured if we want to understand the future of work, we want to understand our place in the world, if we want to understand what work's role in society is going to be, if we can see the bigger context of what's happening, then we can begin to make decisions and strategies rooted in that larger context as opposed to in a silo disconnected from everything else that's going on. And the biggest piece here, or there are three that I'm going to share with you today, The first is that we are moving away from a world that was linear, and we are shifting over into a world that is exponential. Linear thinking, and when we think about our careers in terms of linear thinking, this is actually one of the reasons why so many of us find ourselves in work that isn't fulfilling. It's because we think about work in terms of a linear strategy. What can I logically do with what I've already done and what I already know? Right? We go to a great school, we study something, maybe we get some internships, we step out into the world upon graduation and say, okay, great, congratulations, you are walking out into this world that looks nothing like your schooling environment. And so we root ourselves in the question, what can we logically do with what we've already done and what we already know when we get our first job? And then we amass a few years of skills and experience, and we say, okay, it's time to grow again. And we ask that same question, what can I logically do with what I've already done and what I already know? And we keep building our careers in that fashion, step by step by step. But if you are like I was at the beginning of my career, and you made any decisions for yourself that are no longer particularly aligned with who you are today, what you want to create, and the impact that you want to have, it's no wonder this strategy simply takes you step by step by step away from that place of fulfillment. Whereas if you shift over into thinking about your career to a strategy that I call planting your flag, right? It's taking a few steps back and it's asking those questions. What do I want to create? What kind of impacts do I want to have? How do I want to use my life? And then aligning your skills, resources, and talents behind creating that thing, even if it's a vague notion of it, right? It's this notion of linear to exponential. And when we think about exponential shift and exponential change, I want to dive a little bit into what this means in terms of technology, because the dynamic of exponential shift feels like nothing, nothing, something, everything, right? So Mark Zuckerberg just announced Meta, and he's talking about building out the full-on metaverse. And then immediate pushback that I'm seeing and hearing, you know, NPR, Wall Street Journal, other places saying, yes, but the technology for that doesn't exist today. So it's going to be quite some time before it gets there. We think nothing's happening, and so we sort of shift over into this place of not paying attention to it. But if you notice in the days and the short weeks since he announced that, multiple other Fortune 500 companies are bringing in a chief metaverse officer. They're sharing their metaverse strategies with the world. And so these are the kinds of market shifting announcements that feed into that nothing, nothing, something, everything dynamic of exponential shift. And so I want to share with you, if you haven't read the book from Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler, there's one that's Abundance, and then there's another one called The Future is Faster Than You Think, which we'll explore during the Future of Work class that I will be delivering with the Graham School. There are 6 Ds of exponential change. And this here is as relates to technology, but this is what we can look for as we're looking out in the world and saying, what's going to shift? What's going to change? Is there really nothing happening where I am? Or are we simply in what we call the trough of deception when the technology isn't living up to its expectations, right? So what we want to look at are these 6 Ds. First is the digitalization of something, right? It goes from analog to digital, and then it rides on the back of Moore's law, which is essentially that the capacity of growth and change and disruption doubles, you know, in case of Moore's law, initially once every 2 years. But essentially, we begin to get onto the exponential curve of disruption. Exciting new technologies come onto market, but then the trough of deception, as it is called, it doesn't work the way that they said it would. And this is almost everything in its 1.0 version. You know, currently the metaverse or that game Second Life, like back in the day, right? The very first cell phones that looked like bricks, the Google glasses that, you know, not so many, didn't get the massive adoption in the marketplace that they were hoping for, right? But this is everything in version 1.0. But then technology continues to change and shift and grow, and more investments happening, things are getting better. And then all of a sudden it looks like it's disruptive, even though it's been around for a while. And a clear example here is the example of Thomas Cook, the travel agency based out of, that used to be based out of England, right? Expedia comes online, bookings.com, other organizations make that market much more efficient, but Thomas Cook kept on doubling down in terms of their physical space. And what that did over years of time, you know, their disruption didn't come from one day to the next when the British government shut them down and sort of assumed the company and they disappeared, right? But it was years and years of saying, oh, those things that are disrupting the market, they aren't really real. They aren't really happening. It's just, we're still here in this trough of deception. The fourth phase of this this exponential shift is demonetization, right? So you can think about photography. It used to be very expensive to have a camera to get your film developed. And now with iPhones and other technologies, right, photography is very cheap now. Everybody can have access to it. And so things that were previously inaccessible now become accessible to more and more people. That makes my stepdad, who we call Ben Franklin, a very, very happy individual. Step 5 is the dematerialization of things, right? So that drawer of cords and remote controls that we no longer need and no longer use, think about it. This cell phone now holds what CDs and record players and televisions and big computers used to hold all in one tiny little box. And then finally, democratization, scalability and availability of things to more and more people. And when we think about financing, for example, today with crowdfunding and other initiatives, in the past, you needed to have an in with some VC to get some big bucks to fund a new product. Well, now all you need to do is start a Kickstarter campaign, right? So there's access to things that previously only a privileged few had access to. So this is what I mean. This is part of what I mean when I say we're shifting from linear to exponential. And the important thing to understand about that dynamic is the nothing, something, everything piece of it. The second big paradigm shift is that we're moving away from a world of or and into a world of and. In the past, you were either corporate or entrepreneurial, public or private, digital or industrial, right? And now those barriers are blurring. And a great example of this is Anheuser-Busch InBev, a company that I used to work for. I was one of 4 people who founded, way back in 2009, the beer garage in Palo Alto, California. It started as a tiny center of innovation because even back then they recognized that they needed to begin to disrupt what was happening in the beverage market in order to continue to thrive. Today, that is an enormous innovation center in the middle of Silicon Valley. They've expanded into ZX Ventures, which invests in early stage startups that are disruptive in the beverage industry. And they've even gone beyond this to Ambev Tech, which is a company that is doing disruption along the entire supply chain of the beer industry. So yes, it is a corporate organization, clearly Fortune 500 company, and also it is an entrepreneurial organization. So that blurry line, or that line that used to be so clearly delineated or demarcated, is now dissolving. And then finally, we are shifting away from a world of scarcity and into a world of abundance. Gone are the days of zero-sum game, fixed pie economics, I win, you lose, or vice versa kinds of negotiations. We are shifting over into the game where everybody truly wins, where economics are what I call a bubbly model of economics, right? We're good actors. Think of a bubble bath. You add warm water to the thing, the value, the size of the whole thing grows. So we add value to ourselves in terms of education. We contribute to the world through the value that we're creating. The value of the whole thing grows. Bad actors comes in, and the inverse also happens, right? We're shifting away from a world where the business of business is business and shifting over into a space where the business of business is creating value in and at a larger scale, right? So before I dive into this distinction here between the future of work and working, I want to open up for a question or two that might be here in the chat. Dexter, is there,
yes,
you see any popping in there?
We have great questions. I think the first one that I have comes from Carolina. Some bosses will claim that the Great Resignation is a millennial fueled phenomenon. To what extent do you agree with this?
I got a lot to say on the whole millennial component, right? So first of all, like, the oldest millennials are like in their early 40s now. So it's, so hi, like, welcome to middle age, and welcome to like stepping away from this notion that it's the young people who are coming in and destroying our world, right? So that's the first thing. But the second thing, like, what is so disruptive in this space, which is nuts, but what is so disruptive is that people are and have simply been asking to be treated as human beings with a little bit of flexibility in their workday. You know, if they've got a kid who's sick at home, and to be able to not need to be clocked into a tight schedule. So this is not a millennial only driven exit or exodus, right? People are retiring. There's a chunk of folks who are in sort of that millennial age group. But Gen Z, who is now sort of the younger portion of the workforce, is also walking out the door, right? And it's not solely because we just don't like being in the office, but it is work-life, well, move away from work-life balance, but it's work-life integration. It's finding purpose in the things that we're doing. So this is an across-the-board phenomenon. Even today, research came out saying that the large number or a large component of the people who are walking out the door are early retirees, who are actually not even retiring, but shifting careers completely in a different segment. So no, this is not millennial-led, although, or certainly not in the way that we're toned that that is implied. But secondly, and I think at least for me, the most important point is like, what's so bizarre about wanting to be treated like an adult human being in the workplace and space that's so hard to wrap our heads around, solely because many of us just had to like suck it up for whatever it was, right? Like, so yeah.
That is actually a great segue to the next question that we got, which is from Sophia Johnson. She says, I'm concerned about all of the poor manager supervisors that exist in jobs today. So many of my friends, I'm a millennial, leave jobs due to terrible experiences on the job. They would rather be unemployed and search for work than stay in toxic workplaces. Do you think the Great Resignation will change management in some significant way or not at all? Also, lots of potential lawsuits that people either choose to pursue or let go and leave in the past.
Yeah. So my great hope is that this is the invitation, the call and response to companies as a whole, right? Managers and other leaders, to recognize the impact that they have on the quality of life of the people who are working with them, right? The data has told us for years that people don't leave companies, right? They leave bad companies, they leave bad managers. And so my great hope is that this is a wake-up call to creating work environments that are that operate on the basis of agreements as opposed to expectations, that give clarity in terms of the kinds of growth that we want to have in terms of the kind of opportunities that are available to us. So, why, again, I'll go back to that data around, 80% or more of the planet for more than a decade of time is disengaged or actively disengaged at work. Why we as individuals have taken that for so long, like accepted that as okay, is pretty nuts. And we're seeing a huge pushback against that right now. And though this costs companies billions of dollars in productivity every year, billions, trillions of dollars in productivity every year. So if you don't have an engaged workforce, you're losing cash. So for no other reason, right? Like now is the time to step up and create environments where people want to thrive. So it is my great hope that that happens. And if it hasn't been clear up until now, for me, the focus is like, how do we as human beings find our purpose? And though from a bottom line perspective, like cash, hello, you'll earn more if your people are happy. All right, cool. So I'm going to jump back in here to the balance of the presentation, and then we'll open it up for some more questions toward the end. So with all of that's happening, right, these big paradigm shifts, we're seeing all kinds of disruption. What are some of the questions that the Great Resignation is plating up for us when we think about, and this is an important distinction here, the future of work and the future of working, right? When we look at work, and I will go into this more in my future of work class that I'm teaching at with the Graham School, right? But when we look at future of work and working, it's sort of breaking down this difference between society, companies and organizations, and ourselves. So like, what is the future of work in the broader context of society? What is its role? What does our strategy look like? And then future of working, how do we show up for it? What are the tools that enable us to exercise the things that we call work? And the first, there we go. And the first component of the future of work, and there's several of these, but in the interest of time today in our conversation, I'm just going to share two. So one of the big differences in the future of work, and this also gets to your question about management, middle management is going to slowly fade itself out into the sunset for a whole series of reasons. But we're moving away from an organization and organizational structure that was that pyramid structure. right? Whoever was the boss at the top of the pyramid told everybody underneath them what to do. And this is just what we did. We had to follow marching orders, command and control. We're shifting over into a much more flexible model of leadership that I call an infinity model of leadership. So today, because we're talking about the future of work, and that happens to be an area that I know more in, I'll be the leader. And so my job as a leader is to both share my specialized knowledge, it's to motivate, inspire the team that I'm working with to achieve the results that we're looking for. But tomorrow, because we're talking about alumni relations and programming, then Dexter's going to be the leader. And in my role as a leader, not only do I have to do all the things that I mentioned before, but on the days when Dexter is a leader, I need to have the strength to step away and cede my power and trust and support other people in the place and space. This seems like radical stuff, but it's actually not when you look at the history of things, but right. But this flexibility in leadership is coming to the fore, where each of us, through our unique skills, competencies, and passion and purpose, are able to step into leadership roles over a much more consistent period of time. And then when we also think about the future of work, we are shifting away from a world of career that was ladder. This model was already burnt out many, many, many years ago, into what I call a mosaic career model. So that ladder of career is rooted in some of those things that we talked about before. What can I logically do with what I've already done and what I already know? You lock in one track, one area of focus. You start on day one. You retire on the last day of day 30 or of year 35 or whatever. And you do not shift your career or industry along the way. Well, the mosaic career, there's a whole series of benefits that come along with it, which include fulfillment and future-proofing your career, but it is designing a career that is rooted in the things that you value and industry agnostic. So the professions that you exercise are simply channels for you to express the things that you value in the world through your work, right? And if you can define the things that you value, if one industry closes down or one area of jobs closes down temporarily or over the long term, then you can transfer yourself and your skills much more easily to other spaces. Hello, hospitality industry at the beginning of the pandemic, right? How many people said, and we saw all kinds of interviews across media, well, this is my industry and there are no opportunities. And that's true. But the lock and load thinking of the ladder does a disservice to folks when they're looking for opportunities in the meantime. So if we can begin to think about our career rooted in expressions of the things that we value, combined with the skills that we have, we open up ourselves to much more freedom and nimbleness as we look at work. And then the future of working here, of course, are we going back to the central office? Are we going to do remote work? Are we going to do hybrid work? The answer is it depends, largely, and I would leave as sort of the provoking question here. None of these answers, central, remote, or hybrid, exists in a vacuum. The first question is, what is the strategy of my company? The second question is, what is the best of these options or menu of them that allows me to most efficiently, effectively achieve that strategy? So that's question number two. And we are going to see through tools like, even if it doesn't extend as far as to a full metaverse, but things like augmented reality and virtual reality are going to drastically shift what our working places and spaces are and how we define them moving forward. So the answer here is it depends. And then finally, this notion of the future of working, yes, abilities are going to be important. However, competencies are going to be what's critical. Leadership competencies, mental agility and flexibility, creativity, all critical thinking, all of the skills that will enable us to thrive in an ever-changing world. When people ask me why I enjoyed going to the University of Chicago so much, or like what I got out of the experience, I got a lot of things, but front and center is the notion that, or the idea that even when, and especially when I don't know the answer to the question, I have the tools that it takes to figure out how to get to an answer. And if it's me or if it's a team of people outside of my organization or otherwise, right? And so that's what we're looking for. And one of the biggest competencies that we want to develop is what I call regenerative resilience, right? Because the answer to the question I mentioned, the lightning bolt of the pandemic, we're looking at the tsunami of massive change that's coming down the horizon. So when we're looking at sustained periods of change and disruption with no foreseeable end in sight, how do we not have an 891% jump in the number of calls to the U.S. National Suicide Hotline, right? How do we not have 70% of U.S. workers ready to walk out the door for a company that's going to help them manage their burnout even better, right? Like, how do we get to a point where we don't need that because we have learned to recharge our batteries along the way? And this is where regenerative resilience comes into play. So it's September 12th, 2020, and I'm in downtown Detroit, and I'm walking and wondering, like, what is community going to need? What are we going to do with the pandemic? What's going to be the outcome of all of this? And on the one hand, these are basically across the street from each other, these statues. See the left sculpture, which is the spirit of the city of Detroit, who has hope and light and freedom and brilliance in one hand, who has the image of humanity and the family in the other. And the spirit of Detroit, the inscription behind it, you know, where the spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. So this notion of like freedom and empowerment and connection next to and in the backdrop of the fight for racial and social justice this summer. This fist is a fist of Joe Louis, who, yes, was a world champion boxer, but also a champion of civil rights. And so looking in the face of this hope, fight for something that's better, the answer that came to me was connection. We need to connect with those around us. And so I sent a message to all 4,763 of my connections at the time on LinkedIn to invite everybody into a 20-minute conversation, to ask everybody the same 5 questions. How are we connected? What are you up to now? What do you see as the biggest opportunity? What do you see as the biggest challenge? And from your perspective, as you look out over the next 18 to 24 months, what piece of advice would you share with a fellow human being? What happened, another transformative experience, 161 conversations, more than 80 hours of dialogue, people in 24 countries, a mayoral candidate for the city of New York, executives of publicly traded companies, entrepreneurs, academics, 85, a lot of things came out of that, but 85% of those conversations centered around mental health and resilience. And so to me, it became clear that we need to create a solution for us to thrive that allows us to not only be resilient, but because resilience is effectively, like, it's exhausting, right? For anybody who's a human being over a period of time. So how do we regenerate our strength along the way so that we thrive instead of simply surviving? And regenerative resilience is focused in 3 main pillars. So again, this is underneath that umbrella and that distinction of, are we going to develop our abilities or our competencies? And this is, from my perspective, is the most important leadership competency to develop. It's about clarity, having clarity about who you are, what you're up to, the kind of impact that you want to have, the things that you value, and then ensuring that what you're doing in the world is related to that and allows you to feed that. Secondly, fearlessness, not courage, because again, courage is a fundamentally extractive activity, right? Like, I'm just going to muster the courage. I'm going to feel the fear and do it anyway. Well, that's exhausting, right? When we're looking at change over an extended period of time, we want to learn how to direct and manage the energy that we have, right? We want to learn how to lower our cortisol, diminish the fear, and or utilize the energy that comes from it to help us achieve greater results. And then finally, connection, collaboration, how we communicate about who we are, what we need, and how we build stronger communities around and about ourselves. So today I covered a lot of conversation, right? We started out at the very beginning with the data around the Great Resignation, that it is no great surprise to anybody who's been paying attention. It isn't only millennials, it's people who are on the verge of retiring who are saying, are you kidding me? I've been waiting this many years in order to have a what? It's time for me to go right now, for people who are wanting better. We looked at the larger disruptions that are happening in the marketplace, the impact of technology and work in our working world. We looked at the shifting workforce population and economic changes, because that's what's sparking this look into, again, those broader paradigm shifts, moving away from linear to exponential, or to and, scarcity to abundance. And then we moved through this space of the futures of work and the future of working. As I mentioned at the very beginning, now is the moment in which we are experiencing the manifestation of everything that's come before, and in which we have the power to create what is coming next. We are architecting, designing, building, creating our future right now. And so the choice is here. What do we want to create? So with that, I will open us up for questions for the last 15 minutes of our time here together. And thank you all for sharing this opportunity and this space with me today.
Great. Well, we still have a number of awesome questions in the chat. So first up is from Roman. You spoke of machines and AI taking away from jobs from people. Mary Gray, co-author, goes to work How to Stop Silicon Valley from Building a New Global Underclass. Her view seems to be that there are real people behind many online processes that we assume are purely algorithmic. Do you think this may be the new variation of gig work?
Whether it will be the new variation of gig work. So when we look at gig work, that's much more sort of like a contractual structure, right? Like, do you work 100% of your time? It's like work is like marriage, right? Or traditional work is like marriage. You get with one organization, you stay with them till death do you part, or until you decide to move on to your next company, right? And we're shifting over into this model that I call consensual, like we look at this as consensual non-monogamy, right? Or you may have one organization that you work with, but several others that you work with on the side, be they your side hustle or otherwise. So when we look at that portion of the gig economy, that I see that as much more of a contractual kind of a structure. How are we partnering with companies? But the how this shifts the workforce population at the moment, you know, and there are many people around the world whose job it is to watch YouTube videos to determine if the content that's in them is nefarious or not, damaging or not. And there's a whole other conversation to be had there around like mental health and taking care of workers and that sort of thing. But what I think the interesting dynamic to pay attention to here is at the moment, human beings are doing what technology is not yet capable of doing. However, there's going to be an inflection point where the technology is in theory better or will have learned enough so that the humans will no longer be needed for those particular roles. So that's where I think the interesting dynamic is, and more than interesting dynamic, the questions for us as leaders in the world: how do we want to ensure that those jobs that will eventually disappear, that those people have an empowered pathway to other economic opportunities?
Great, thank you. Another interesting question from Emily. What do you think the future of unionization is? I don't see the tech world endorsing unions anytime soon.
Yeah, well, so my, albeit albeit biased opinion, right? I grew up in Detroit. My grandparents worked in the factories here. And so recognizing the power on behalf of workers, right, of the unions to ensure that there are safe working conditions, that people get paid a fair wage. And we're seeing, you know, what's happening with John Deere and the 128 or 178 strikes that have happened over the course of this calendar year. I hope that there is always a role for, or be they traditional unions or some other kind of an organization that is in support of workers' rights. I think that they play overall an important function, important role in the society that we live in. What's happened in the auto industry and the auto workers union is sort of another conversation there. But in general, I hope that unions and or an analogous kind of an organization whose job it is, whose purpose for existing is to support workers' rights will continue to exist.
Great. Seema has a question. I'm connecting the dots between these paradigm shifts and the opportunities found in the concepts of solidarity economy. Have you explored this in your work?
Mm-hmm. Now, I haven't specifically explored solidarity economy in the work that I'm doing. So I've been looking at things from a much more macro perspective. But what I would say as we're looking, as you're examining any of the components, this is sparking interest, right? Is that we are being invited to challenge everything that we have thought and understood as the way work is, the way business is in the world. And so this is an invitation to challenge and to continue to dismantle some of the structures that are standing today.
All right, we'll keep them going. We have a couple more minutes left. So, this is a question from Hector Mendoza. I wonder to what extent the Great Resignation is actually the great job switching, making this a one-sided problem of a two-sided relationship. Do you have any insights on this?
So leaving company A to have the same job at company B, right? And so I think this is where, are people leaving their jobs in one organization to go to another organization? It would seem that that is not the case, because the CEOs are saying, we can't find people to fill the jobs that we have. So I really see a flip in sort of this supply demand component, and we are seeing in that same Fortune Deloitte study that I cited earlier. CEOs are like they're saying in the article, CEOs are trying everything that they can think of. Is it more money? Is it more time off? Is it more this? Is it more that? So I would say that companies are really feeling the pinch, and again, if they don't step up to the plate and create, on the frontline workers' place and space, workable wages for people, in others places and spaces, a little bit more space for work-life integration or being able to breathe and not spending 100% of the time in work, they're going to continue to see those challenges. Because again, when we look at that the 6 Ds of exponential shift, the democratization component, the past of work was salaried, the future of work is entrepreneurial, whether it is you building a billion-dollar unicorn, being a freelancer, gig worker of some kind, or having to have entrepreneurial skills inside of a larger organization. So the onus at the moment is really with larger companies to create the opportunities that people that are attractive to folks.
I liked that question. I was curious what your insights were on that one too. Jacqueline has a question, and this was submitted before I think you started your second piece of your presentation. You talked about disruption, but not how individuals can take advantage of it. What industries, roles, perspectives do you recommend people seek out to make the most of this change?
Mm-hmm. So I would offer that there's probably a question or two to be asked before you dive into the what role do I want to take, right? So when we look at that difference between the mosaic career and sort of the building block or the more traditional career, what you want to do is do the exercises where you're taking a few steps back. And these 3 questions are at the top that you can answer. And there's a whole way to go about this design process. But what do I want to create? What kind of impact do I want to have? How do I want to use my life? And when you have answers to those broader questions, the same sort of strategy as the strategies that I was sharing before, right? Then you can begin to say, okay, underneath what I want to create for my life, what are the possible pathways in the market, meaning specific job opportunities, specific industries that I can lock and load into that are going to help me achieve the things that I want to for my life, right? But what you want to look at, and a great place to start, so what industries are in ascension and what industries are in decline? What industries are closer to the automation component of, and the robotization component? Service industries certainly at the front and center of that. But what's closer to getting taken over by robots and what's further away to getting taken over by robots? And the obvious answers are right in front of us, repeatable tasks, things that don't require a lot of mental creativity. Those are likely the ones that are going to get robotized first, and then things that are more creative in nature are likely later on going to be. So having a look at what industries are in ascension and in decline, what is technology doing, and how close is that disruptive technology to the place where I'm working? And then the inverse of that, so how do we ensure that we're taking advantage of the opportunities that are here? Get into conversations with other human beings, read as much as you possibly can. And then finally, one of the things that or how I think about my work as a futurist is you look beyond what's present and into what's possible. And so, especially from Chicago, right? Like we're a really data-driven kind of cohort in general. And so we often want to say, but the data today is telling us X. But the data today is telling us X. And while that's important, what happens when the assumptions that are driving the data today that are telling us X no longer apply? And so when you are able to look at what's here and what's present and ask questions like, what might we be able to do with this? How might this impact industry X or industry Y? Then you begin to open up additional opportunities. for yourselves, for your career, and move into some of the magic that is the possibility of what's here and what's coming.
I love that, present versus possible. I think I'm going to write that down and sticky that on my desk. I keep that with me. I love that. I think this is going to be our last question for the day, and actually it's centered around education, which I suppose is good. This is from Ruth. We've always had change, but what is unprecedented is the velocity of change driven by technology, et cetera, as we've been talking about. How must education, college and above, pre-K through 12, change to address this new reality?
Oh, that was a big can of worms. So we are closing here. So I think like the short flip answer is it must, right? It must. And though when we are looking at a world, so when that stat that I shared, that 85% of the jobs that are going to exist in 2030 don't exist, haven't been invented yet today. Today's 2021. So like, in a month and a half is going to be 2022. It's like 8 years of time. In the past, up until now, more traditional educational institutions they're not known for innovation in sort of the curriculum or the programming space or as much flexibility there, right? Like academia is academia because it is tried and true and longstanding and all of those characteristics, right? And so the invitation is to how might we become more flexible in our curricula? How might we, in addition to the skills and abilities that we are teaching people, shift over into some of these competencies that the World Economic Forum and others are saying that we need in order to thrive? How might we ensure that we are giving people the mental tools? Because, and this is why I'm so fascinated with regenerative resilience. Our brains, like getting a little bit into or touching on the neuroscience of it, like we were not evolved to handle this much uncertainty, this much change over this sustained of a period of time, right? So that would be the other place that I would invite schools to help people, to help their students to get their brains flexible enough to thrive in the face of this change, as opposed to, again, getting hit by it, because we are just at the beginning. And again, it is more opportunity than we have ever had in front of us. The invitation is for us to simply make the shift and be willing to unhook from what was and shift our focus into what will be, which each of us has in our hands the power to create right now.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been, I'm walking away certainly very inspired, and I can tell by everything that's happening in the chat that this has just been so wonderful. So thank you for all of your insights and sharing your wisdom with us. And thank everyone who's on the Zoom call for setting aside maybe your lunch hour to expand your career horizons. We so appreciate you being here. And just a few reminders, if you'd like to hear more from Elatia, here is a link to her course with the Graham School. And in addition to this, I'm also sharing a brief survey in the chat now. Please, we appreciate your feedback more than we can tell you. And our team does look at all of these surveys. So please fill one out, let us know your thoughts on Career Month and today's course. And we just truly appreciate hearing from you. And as I mentioned, we still have a few programs left for Career Month before we head into Thank a Mentor Week. So please be sure to check out Alumni and Friends at uchicago.edu for more exciting and fun programming for Career Month. And with that, thank you all again, and have a lovely day.
Thank you, everybody.